The year was 2154, and humanity had just begun to make its mark among the stars. The first peaceful contact with an alien species had been made, and Earth was buzzing with excitement. The space station orbiting Earth had been chosen as the venue for the first ever diplomatic summit with the galaxy's many races. Among the delegations arriving was a striking figure, Viora Valzar, a member of the Tsirian race, who commanded the attention of everyone around her the moment she stepped off her sleek, silver ship. She was tall, easily towering over the humans nearby, with skin that shimmered like polished silver, glowing faintly under the station's bright lights. Her dark violet tattoos, which ran across her arms and shoulders, flickered with a soft, otherworldly light, as if they had a life of their own. Her eyes, deep purple and piercing, surveyed the gathered crowd, and there was an undeniable aura of power about her. The whispers started almost immediately. The Exirionians were known for their strength and advanced technology, but there was something unusual about Viora. As the crew and diplomats around her gathered in curiosity, she stepped forward, raised her hand, and made an announcement that left everyone in stunned silence. "I seek a human," she declared boldly. "A human mate, to bond with me in the ways of my people." Her words hung in the air, causing an immediate stir. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, as if time itself had decided to pause to process what had just been said. A human. The thought was almost impossible to comprehend. After all, humans had only just begun their journey in the galaxy and had never been involved in the intimate affairs of any alien species, let alone in the idea of bonding with them. The concept seemed outlandish, even absurd. Yet there Viora stood, confident and unwavering, her gaze now locked on the humans around her, as if daring anyone to challenge her request. Among the crowd was Captain Orion Drakes, the leader of the human delegation. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline and piercing gray eyes, Captain Drakes was a man of few words, preferring action over speeches. His military background had prepared him for many challenges, but this was new. He was a seasoned leader, used to keeping control of situations, but the shock of Viora's declaration left him at a loss for words. He glanced at his crew, including Dr. Selena Cato, a brilliant astrobiologist with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. She stood beside him, her small frame barely visible beneath the towering presence of the others, her dark eyes wide behind her glasses as she processed the situation. "What does she mean by mate?" Selena asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the question was too absurd to ask aloud. "I'm not sure," Drakes replied, his voice low and filled with caution. He knew that the relationship between Earth and the galaxy's various species was fragile. If anything went wrong, it could spark tensions between the entire galaxy and humanity. But why would Viora make such a request in the first place? As the room slowly began to murmur with confusion and disbelief, Viora's calm, steady voice once again rose above the noise. "I seek the strength of humanity," she said. "Your species has a resilience that no other can match, and only a human can help my people evolve in ways you cannot yet understand. I need one of you to stand by my side." The implications of her words hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just a request. It was a challenge. Viora didn't want just any human. She wanted someone who could prove humanity's worth, and as Captain Drakes locked eyes with her, he realized that this would be no ordinary mission. His mind raced, questions flooding his thoughts. Why him? Why now? Before he could speak, a voice from the crowd called out, "What does this mean for us, Captain?" It was a diplomatic officer, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Drakes straightened up, his posture becoming even more authoritative. The weight of the moment was clear to him. This was not just a diplomatic incident. This was a chance for humanity to prove its place in the universe. And despite the doubt swirling in his mind, he couldn't help but feel that something much larger was at play. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Captain Orion Drakes stood in front of Viora Valzar, his mind still racing to understand what had just happened. A human mate. It sounded impossible, but the alien woman seemed so certain, so unshaken. Drake's, known for his logical mind and clear-headedness in even the most chaotic of situations, found himself at a loss. But he couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. He had a responsibility to both humanity and to the crew he had promised to protect. Viora's eyes, those deep purple pools of mystery, locked onto his with a look that felt both challenging and something else. It was almost as if she was sizing him up, seeing if he could handle what was coming next. "You do not understand, do you, Captain?" she said, her voice calm, but heavy with purpose. "My people, the Exurionians, are in a state of decay. Our biology is stagnant. We need something that will push us to the next stage of evolution. And I believe that the answer lies in your species." Drake stared at her for a moment, absorbing her words. Dr. Selena Keto, standing beside him, adjusted her glasses, her gaze flicking back and forth between the two of them. Her curiosity about Viora's claims was written clearly on her face. "How does this bonding, as you call it, work?" she asked, her voice betraying her skepticism. "What are you asking, exactly?" Viora smiled slightly, as if she had expected such a question. "I seek a human who is willing to undergo a series of trials," she explained. "Trials to test your species' resilience, your adaptability. Those are the traits we need. We will see if your mind and body can endure the process. If you can prove that a human can survive these tests, then we will bond, and Xurian will evolve." Drake's wasn't sure if he was fascinated or horrified by what she was suggesting. It felt like something out of a science fiction novel, not real life. But the seriousness in her eyes told him she wasn't playing games. She wasn't bluffing. The room was filled with murmurs as the alien delegation watched in silence. Drake's knew that this was more than just a personal challenge. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy. If the tests were successful, humanity could be seen as the key to saving an entire alien species. If they failed, well, he wasn't sure what would happen, but it wasn't something he wanted to think about. Turning to his crew, Drakes gave a single nod. "We'll do it," he said firmly. Selena raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak, a sign that she was still uncertain. She wasn't fully convinced, but she trusted Drake's judgment. And right now, the captain had made a decision. Viora's smile deepened, and there was a spark in her eyes that made Drake's uneasy, though he didn't show it. "Good. The trials will begin tomorrow. You will be tested physically, mentally, and even emotionally. Prepare yourself." Her words were calm, but there was a certain weight to them, like she was giving him a glimpse of what was to come. That night, Drakes lay awake in his quarters, thinking about the challenge ahead. His mind was racing. What kind of tests would he face? And how would his body hold up to whatever Viora had planned? The possibilities swirled in his head. One thing was certain. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. It wasn't just about peace or alliances anymore. This was a test of humanity's survival, of proving to the universe that they weren't just another species waiting to be wiped out by the stronger ones. The next day, Drakes and Selena followed Viora to a private chamber on her ship, a place that seemed both ancient and futuristic. The walls pulsed with an eerie energy, and the air seemed charged with something unexplainable. "The first test will be physical," Viora explained, leading them into a large room where strange machines stood. The machines hummed with a strange power, and Drakes couldn't help but wonder if they were designed to push his limits. "These devices will test your endurance. We want to see how your body reacts under extreme pressure." Drakes took a deep breath. This wasn't just about surviving the trials. It was about showing that humans were more than capable of facing the unknown. And despite the nagging doubts in his mind, he was ready. This was a challenge that couldn't be ignored. For humanity. For the future. Selena glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but Drakes could see the fire in her eyes. She, too, understood the weight of what was happening. They were on the brink of something huge, something that could change everything. As the first trial began, Drakes could feel the pressure building. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the strange machines that filled the space. Captain Orion Drakes stood tall in the center, his muscles tense as he prepared for the first trial. The machines surrounding him were sleek and unfamiliar, their designs unlike anything he had seen before. Viora watched from the side, her violet eyes focused and intense, as if she were studying him rather than simply overseeing the test. Dr. Selena Cato stood nearby, her arms crossed and her expression uncertain. She had never seen technology like this before, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on here than just physical testing. "Are you ready, Captain?" Viora's voice broke the silence, smooth and unwavering. Drakes nodded, his jaw set. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was prepared to face whatever challenge lay ahead. "Let's do this." The first machine activated, and a series of pressure pads surrounded Drakes, adjusting to his height and build. Suddenly, he was thrust into a series of movements, running, jumping, and lifting, all while the machines applied pressure that tested his strength and endurance. His body was pushed to the limit, sweat pouring down his brow as he fought to keep up with the demands. Drakes gritted his teeth, the pain in his muscles intensifying with each passing second. He had been through tough training, but this was different. The machines were relentless, and the pressure they applied felt as though it were coming from everywhere at once. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he wondered if he could keep going. He had never been pushed like this before, but the thought of failing humanity, the thought of letting down the people he had promised to protect, pushed him forward. Through the haze of exhaustion, something strange began to happen. He felt a warmth spreading through his body, starting from his chest and radiating outward. It was as if an unseen force had been awakened within him, something that had been dormant, hidden deep inside. At first, it was subtle, just a strange tingling sensation. But then it grew stronger, more intense, like a current of energy that was surging through his veins. Drakes gasped, feeling the energy flow through him like nothing he had ever experienced. His mind sharpened, and his body seemed to respond in ways he couldn't explain. The pressure pads that had been pushing against him now felt almost insignificant, as if the energy inside him had given him the strength to push through anything. His legs moved faster, his arms grew stronger, and his breath steadied. Viora watched with a mix of curiosity and awe. She had known that humans possessed incredible potential, but seeing it in action, seeing it in Drakes, was something else entirely. She had heard the stories, but to witness the raw power of a human in the midst of such a test was unlike anything she had imagined. She had been searching for something to save her people, but could it be possible that the answer was standing right in front of her? Drakes didn't answer at first. He was too focused on the strange new feeling coursing through him. Every movement, every breath, seemed to be connected to the energy inside him. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. Something inside him had changed. Something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, had been awakened. Selena, standing off to the side, observed in silent disbelief. She had watched Drakes undergo physical challenges before, but this was different. The change in him was undeniable. She had read theories about human potential, but nothing had ever suggested this level of transformation. She took a cautious step forward, her scientific curiosity piqued. "Captain, what's happening to you?" Selena asked, her voice filled with both concern and fascination. You're not just adapting. I don't know," Drakes interrupted, his voice strained but steady. "But whatever this is, it's making me stronger." Viora's smile deepened, though it was tinged with something like reverence. "This is what I meant," she said softly. "The human mind and body are capable of things we Xerionians could never imagine. You have the potential to break through boundaries, to evolve beyond what you believe is possible. The room seemed to pulse with the energy that now surrounded Drake's. It wasn't just his physical strength that had been tested. It was his very essence. He felt different, more powerful than ever before. But with that power came uncertainty. What was this force that had awakened inside him? Was this something that could be controlled, or would it consume him? As the test continued, Drake's pushed himself harder, not just to meet the challenges, but to understand the power that had been unlocked within him. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. The stakes were higher than ever. The trials had only just begun, but Captain Orion Drake's was already feeling the weight of the power that surged through him. Each test, whether physical or mental, seemed to draw on that strange force within him. The feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had always been in control of his body and mind, but now, with this unknown power coursing through him, he felt like he was on the edge of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The next trial was about to begin. Dr. Selena Cato, ever the scientist, watched with both fascination and concern. She had seen the way Drake's had changed during the last test. His performance had gone from impressive to nearly supernatural. It was as if the energy inside him was unlocking new abilities with every passing moment. She wasn't sure if it was some kind of biological adaptation or something far more complex, but she knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary human. "Captain," Selena said, approaching Drake's as he prepared for the next trial. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency in it. "I need you to be careful. We don't know the full extent of what's happening to you. This power, it could be dangerous." Drake's turned to her, his gaze steady but filled with a hint of uncertainty. "I know," he replied, his voice low. "But I don't have a choice. Whatever this is, I need to push through. For humanity. For the future." Selena didn't respond immediately, her mind racing with questions. How had this happened? Was this some kind of evolutionary leap, or was it something else entirely? She glanced over at Viora Valzar, who stood on the other side of the room, her eyes locked onto Drake's with an expression that was difficult to read. Was Viora behind this change, or was it something triggered by the trials themselves? Viora stepped forward, her movements graceful and fluid. "Are you ready, Captain?" she asked, her voice as smooth and confident as ever. She didn't seem concerned at all, even though she knew the human before her was no longer quite the same as the one who had first entered the room. Drake's nodded, not bothering to hide the storm of thoughts running through his mind. He could feel the energy inside him, waiting to be released. It was as though it was growing stronger with each passing moment, each trial. He didn't know what the end result would be, but he knew he had to keep going. There was no turning back now. The next trial was unlike anything Drake's had experienced before. The room transformed before his eyes. The walls shifted, and strange symbols began to glow across the floor, filling the air with a low hum. It was like stepping into a completely different world. Viora's eyes sparkled with anticipation as she activated the test. The ground beneath Drake's feet began to shift, and he found himself standing on a platform that rose into the air. "You will now face your greatest challenge yet," Viora announced, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This trial is designed to test your mind. You must solve a series of puzzles while maintaining control over your newfound strength. Fail, and you will be sent back to your starting point." Drake steeled himself, ready for whatever was coming. As the platform shifted beneath him, holographic images appeared, displaying complex geometric patterns and equations that seemed to swirl around him in midair. His task was simple in theory: solve the puzzles. But the strange energy that flowed through him made it harder than he could have imagined. Each puzzle felt like a weight added to his mind, pushing him to the edge of his limits. His thoughts seemed to blur and distort as the energy within him tried to assert control. Selena watched from the sidelines, her eyes narrowing with concern. She could see that Drake's was struggling, not just with the puzzles, but with the energy inside him. It was almost as if the power was overwhelming him, threatening to take over his mind as well as his body. Viora, on the other hand, appeared entirely calm. Her gaze never left Drake's, her expression unreadable. "Focus, Captain," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "This is the true test. If you cannot control yourself here, then you will never be ready for the bond I seek." Drake's clenched his fists, fighting against the chaos in his mind. He had come so far. He couldn't fail now. With every ounce of concentration, he pushed the energy back, trying to focus on the task at hand. Slowly, the equations began to make sense, the patterns falling into place. Each puzzle, no matter how complex, became solvable as his mind cleared. But as the final puzzle appeared, something changed. The energy inside him surged again, pushing him to the brink. Was he losing control, or was he finally beginning to understand it? The answer was unclear, but Drake's knew that he couldn't let the energy win. Not now. Not when everything depended on him. Captain Orion Drakes stood at the center of the room, his body covered in sweat, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The final puzzle had been completed, but the strange energy inside him refused to calm. It surged through his veins, pulsating in rhythm with his heartbeat. He had managed to solve the tests, to push his mind and body to their limits, but it was no longer just about the puzzles. Now it was about survival, about whether he could control the power that seemed to be growing stronger with every passing moment. Around him, the room had shifted again. The holographic images that had once surrounded him had vanished, leaving only the cold, sterile walls. But the air felt thick, charged with an electricity he couldn't explain. Dr. Selena Cato stood nearby, her eyes wide with concern. She had been watching the trials unfold, her scientific mind grappling with the impossible changes in Drake's. She had seen his physical transformation, but this was something else entirely. The energy that now radiated from him was something beyond human comprehension. "Captain," Selena said cautiously, stepping closer, "you need to control it. If you don't, it could break you. We don't even know what this power is." Drakes didn't answer. His focus was fixed ahead, but his mind was a swirl of confusion. The energy within him felt as if it had a mind of its own. It pushed at the walls of his consciousness, threatening to consume him. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it in check. He had thought that the tests would stop once he proved himself, but now he understood the truth. The trials weren't just a test of strength. They were a test of his very willpower. Viora watched from the side, her expression unreadable. The Caxirionian woman had been quiet throughout the trial, but now her voice broke the silence. "It's not enough, Captain," she said, her voice low but steady. "You've passed every test, but the true challenge is still to come." Drake's head snapped toward her. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice strained. "I've done everything you've asked. I've pushed myself beyond anything I thought was possible." Viora stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You've proven your strength, Captain, but now you must face the most difficult trial of all. You must surrender control. You must allow the power inside you to fully take over." Drake's stomach twisted at her words. "Surrender control," he repeated, disbelief flooding his voice. "Are you asking me to let go of everything? To lose myself?" Viora's lips curled into a faint smile, though her eyes remained serious. "Not lose yourself, Captain. Gain a new understanding of what you are capable of. My people need this. You need this. Only then can we bond and move forward. Only then can the Xirionians evolve." Drake's fists clenched, the tension in his body building. He had come so far, pushed so hard, but the thought of giving up control over his own body and mind terrified him. How could he trust the power that had already changed him so much? What would happen if he let it take over completely? Would he still be the same person? Would he even be human anymore? As he stood there, torn between the urge to fight the power inside him and the need to follow Viora's instructions, he felt something shift. It was as if the energy had been waiting for him to make a decision. With a sudden, overwhelming force, it surged forward, flooding every inch of his being. Drake's breath caught in his throat as the power rushed through him, faster and stronger than ever before. He had no choice now but to let it happen. The room around him seemed to distort, bending and shifting as the energy inside him intensified. For a moment, Drake's felt as though he were outside of his body, watching himself from a distance. The power was no longer just a force within him. It was part of him. It flowed through him like a river, unstoppable and uncontainable. He had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. "Captain," Selena cried, her voice laced with panic. "You need to fight it. It's too much for you." Viora's voice reached him, but it was distant, as though she were speaking from another world. "You've done it, Captain," she said, her voice full of awe. "You've unlocked the true potential of your kind." For the first time, Drake's felt no fear. The power, once overwhelming, now felt like a part of him, a force that could be harnessed and controlled. He understood now. He was not just a human anymore. He was something more. As the room around him settled, the energy began to recede, but Drake's remained unchanged. He had crossed into a new realm of existence, one that only a few beings in the universe could ever hope to understand. And with this new power came a responsibility. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that whatever came next, he would face it as something more than human. He would face it as the future of both humanity and the Exurionians. Captain Orion Drakes stood at the center of the room, his mind spinning with the incredible power that now flowed through him. The energy that had once overwhelmed him had become a part of him, something he could feel deep within his soul. It was as though a door had been opened to a new world, one full of possibilities and dangers he couldn't yet fully comprehend. The surge of power had left him breathless, his body trembling from the intensity of it all. He looked up to find Viora Valzar standing before him, her expression unreadable but somehow triumphant. The Exurionian woman had been the one to push him this far, to unlock the potential that lay dormant within him. But now, as the weight of his transformation settled in, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What had he become? Was he still human, or had he crossed a line from which there was no return? "You've done it, Captain," Viora said, her voice smooth and calm, yet laced with something else. Pride, perhaps. "You've unlocked the power I knew was inside you. Now, the next step begins." Drakes swallowed, his throat dry. He felt different, stronger, sharper, more aware of the world around him. But with that strength came a heavy burden. He could feel the weight of Viora's words, the expectation in her voice. She had brought him here, to this moment. But now that he had what she wanted, what would she ask of him next? "Next," Drakes repeated, his voice hoarse. "What's next? What am I supposed to do with this power?" Viora took a step closer, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "You will help me, Captain. You will help me save my people. The Exurionians are dying. We are on the brink of extinction, and I believe that together, with this power inside you, we can restore our species to its former glory." Drakes frowned. "You want me to help you conquer the universe. You want me to be a weapon." Viora's expression softened, but there was no denying the determination in her eyes. "Not a weapon. A savior. You see, our people have been stagnating for centuries. We've been searching for a way to evolve, to break free from the limitations of our biology. What you possess, Captain, is the answer. The power inside you, the strength you now have, is the key to Exurionian survival. But I cannot do this alone." Drakes took a step back, his mind racing. He could feel the energy inside him, pulsing with life. The power was intoxicating, but he was afraid of what it might turn him into. If he gave in completely to it, what would happen to his humanity? Could he ever return to being just a man again? But then his thoughts turned to his people, to Earth. Could he stand by and do nothing while another species used his power to survive? What was he supposed to do? He had been chosen for this, for something greater than himself, but he wasn't sure he was ready to make the choice that would define not only his future, but the future of both humanity and the Xerionians. Drakes looked at Dr. Selena Keto, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, her face full of concern. She had been with him every step of the way, guiding him through the trials, trying to understand the changes he was going through. Now, it was clear that Selena, too, was unsure of what came next. "You know this is dangerous," Selena said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "You're playing with forces you don't fully understand. And so is she." She gestured toward Viora. "I understand why she wants you, Captain. But you're not just a tool for her to use. You're human. Don't forget that." Drakes felt a pang of guilt, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming presence of the energy inside him. His mind was pulled in two directions: to help Viora, to help the Xerionians, or to find a way to retain his humanity, to stay true to who he was. The power within him seemed to be pushing him toward one option, while his heart told him something else. "Please," Selena added, her voice trembling with emotion, "think carefully about what you're about to do. Once you make this choice, there's no going back." Drakes closed his eyes, his chest tightening. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He had been given a gift. No, a curse. And now he had to decide whether to use it to save a species that was not his own or to protect what made him human. As he opened his eyes, he looked from Viora to Selena, his heart racing. He knew that whatever decision he made now would change everything. There was no turning back. He had been given the power to shape the future of two worlds. But which path would he choose? Viora took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. "The fate of the Xerionians is in your hands, Captain. Will you save us, or will you let us die?" Captain Orion Drakes stood in the center of the room, his mind swirling with the weight of the decision that lay before him. The power inside him buzzed like a storm, constantly urging him to surrender to it, to let it take control. He could feel it, pulsing through his veins, speaking to him with promises of strength, of greatness, of unimaginable potential. And yet the more he felt its pull, the more he questioned everything he had once believed in. Was this the path to true power? Or was it a dangerous trap, leading him down a road from which there was no return? Viora Valzar stood before him, her eyes full of expectation. She had been the one to guide him to this point, to unlock the power that now coursed through his body. And now, with the Xerionian future hanging in the balance, she was waiting for him to make a choice that would define the fate of her people, and perhaps the fate of humanity as well. "Captain," Viora said, her voice soft but firm, "you can feel it, can't you? The power, the strength that flows through you now. This is the gift of the Xerionian race, a gift that can save us from extinction. Together, we can change the universe. You've seen what you're capable of. You've felt the transformation. Now, all you have to do is embrace it." Drakes took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing heavily on his chest. He had seen the power, yes. He had felt it transform him, turning him into something more than human. But was that something worth losing himself over? Was the survival of the Xerionians worth the risk of losing what made him who he was? Across the room, Dr. Selena Keto watched with a mixture of concern and sadness. She had been there for Drakes through every trial, every challenge. She had seen him struggle, seen the human side of him fight to stay grounded. But now, as she watched him face this moment, she couldn't help but feel afraid. Afraid of what might happen if he chose the wrong path. Afraid that the power inside him would consume him, just as it had consumed so many others before him. "Orion," Selena said, her voice full of worry, "please, think about this. You don't have to do this. The Xerionians, Viora, they're not your responsibility. We have our own people to save. We can find a way to help them without losing everything that makes us who we are." But Drakes couldn't tear his eyes away from Viora. That Xerionian woman had a way of making everything she said sound like the only choice. The power inside him was undeniable. It was like a call, urging him to embrace it, to take it further, to become something greater. Yet the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. What would happen if he gave in completely? Would he still be able to recognize himself? Would he still be able to care about the people he loved? Or would he become a tool, a weapon used to fulfill someone else's vision? Viora's gaze softened as she watched him wrestle with his thoughts. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the conflict warring within him. She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. Orion, I know it's hard. I know you feel torn. But this power, it is the key to our survival. And it is your destiny. Don't you see? You were chosen for this. You were chosen to lead us. To be more than just a man. To become a force that will change the world. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Drakes felt the pull again, stronger now. The energy inside him surge, pushing him to act, to make a decision. He could feel it in his bones. This was his moment, the moment that would define everything. But the more he listened to Viora, the more he heard Selena's warning echo in his mind. Could he trust the Xerionians? Could he trust Viora? She had been the one to guide him. Yes, but what if she was using him? What if all of this, the trials, the power, the promises, was just a way to manipulate him into doing her bidding? I need time, Drake said, his voice trained. I need to think. I can't make this decision yet. Viora's face hardened for a moment, a flicker of frustration crossing her features, but she quickly masked it with a calm smile. You have all the time you need, Captain. But remember, time is running out for my people. You can't afford to wait forever. With that, Viora stepped back, leaving Drakes alone in the room with his thoughts. Selena watched him quietly, her heart heavy with the weight of his uncertainty. She wanted to believe that he could hold on to his humanity, that he could resist the temptation of the power inside him. But deep down, she knew that the decision he was about to make could change everything. For him, for the Xerionians, and for the future of both their worlds. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker. Drake stood frozen, caught between the promises of power and the haunting fear of losing himself. Would he embrace his new destiny? Or would he reject it, and in doing so, risk? Captain Orion Drakes stood alone in the quiet, dimly lit room, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could feel the power inside him, like a living thing, pulsating with energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Every breath he took seemed to amplify the surge within, reminding him that he was no longer just a man. He had changed, and with that change came a responsibility that he couldn't ignore. But the question remained, was it a responsibility he was ready to shoulder? The walls of the room felt like they were closing in on him. He was caught between two worlds, the promise of limitless power, the future of the Xerionian race, and the pull of his humanity. The people he loved, the life he once knew. Viora Valzar, with her quiet insistence, had made it clear that he was the key to the Xerionian survival. But at what cost? Drake's mind raced as he replayed the words of Dr. Selena Cato. Her voice, full of worry, echoed in his thoughts. You don't have to do this. The Xerionians aren't your responsibility. She had always been there for him, offering wisdom and support, guiding him through the trials. But now, as the weight of the future pressed down on him, he could see the fear in her eyes, fear that he might lose himself in the very power he had unlocked. He thought about Earth, about the people he was supposed to protect. Could he really betray them for the sake of a species that wasn't his own? Even if the Xerionians were dying, did that mean he had to sacrifice everything to save them? The decision gnawed at him, pulling him in different directions. He could feel the power inside him, its promise of strength and invincibility. It whispered to him, urging him to let go, to embrace it fully. But in the back of his mind, he heard Selena's voice again. Once you make this choice, there's no turning back. The words were a warning, but they were also a truth that he couldn't ignore. Suddenly, he was no longer alone. Viora had entered the room, her steps silent against the cold floor. She was standing at a distance, watching him carefully, her expression unreadable. She had always been confident, certain in her beliefs, but now there was something different in her eyes. A flicker of impatience, perhaps, or desperation. She knew that time was running out for her people. "You've had time, Captain," Viora said, her voice smooth but firm. "My people are dying. The power you hold is the only chance we have. The only chance they have. What are you waiting for?" Drakes turned to face her, his eyes narrowed with uncertainty. "I'm waiting for the right choice. I'm waiting for the answer that doesn't come at the cost of everything I've ever known." Viora's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You think I'd want you to lose yourself, Captain? You think I'd want you to give up who you are? No. What I want is for you to understand what you are capable of, what you could become. This power inside you, it was meant for something greater than you can possibly imagine." Drakes shook his head, frustration building. "But at what cost, Viora? At what cost to humanity, to Earth?" Viora stepped closer, her voice softening. "I don't ask you to turn your back on your people. I don't ask you to forget them. But you have to understand that the universe doesn't work in absolutes. You cannot save everyone. You cannot hold on to everything." Drakes clenched his fists, the energy inside him flaring in response. He could feel it, burning at the edges of his consciousness, begging him to release it. He could feel the choice in every fiber of his being, like a final test he had to pass. But he didn't know the answer. He didn't know what it meant to be both human and something more. Viora was right about one thing. Time was running out. The Exirionians couldn't wait forever. But neither could he. He was standing at the edge of something monumental. A choice that would shape the future of not just his people, but the entire galaxy. If he chose to embrace the power, if he allowed it to consume him, would he still be the captain he had once been? Would he still be the man who had fought for humanity, for Earth? As Drake stood there, caught in the grip of uncertainty, a single thought struck him. What if there's another way? For the first time, a glimmer of hope stirred within him. Maybe there was a solution that didn't involve sacrificing his humanity, or the Exirionians' future. Maybe he didn't have to choose between one or the other. Maybe he could find a way to bridge the gap between both worlds. The air in the room seemed to grow still as Drakes took a deep breath, the energy within him settling for a brief moment. His gaze locked with Viora's, and he knew that the next few seconds would define everything. The future of two species, no, the future of the universe, was in his hands. And now, more than ever, he had to make the right choice. The air was thick with anticipation as Captain Orion Drakes stood at the threshold of his decision. The power inside him roared like a storm, its presence overwhelming, but not as overwhelming as the weight of the choice he had to make. His heart was torn between two worlds, his humanity, which he clung to desperately, and the universe-altering potential of the power he now possessed. He could feel the eyes of Viora Valzar on him, her expectations almost suffocating, and the silent plea of Dr. Selena Cato echoing in his mind. He had spent hours pacing, turning over every possibility, trying to find a way to satisfy both sides of the equation. There had to be a way to protect the Exirionians without sacrificing what he had fought so hard to protect, his humanity, his Earth. But the longer he thought about it, the more he realized that such a path might not exist. The universe, as Viora had pointed out, didn't work in absolutes. There would always be sacrifices, always compromises. Viora had told him time and time again that the future of her people depended on him, that this power was the key to their survival. But at what cost? If he gave in completely to the power, what would become of him? What would he lose? He had been through so much already, losing his friends, his way of life, his sense of self. Could he truly risk losing more? Orion, Viora's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and insistent. You've had time. You've seen the consequences of inaction. My people are on the brink of extinction. We don't have the luxury of waiting any longer. You have to make a choice." Drake's turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Her words were like a hammer, striking at the core of his hesitation. But there was something else in her eyes now. A flicker of doubt, something he hadn't seen before. She wasn't as certain as she had been when they first met. She, too, was starting to understand the gravity of what was at stake, and that made the decision all the more difficult. He glanced over at Selena, who stood a few steps away, her arms crossed, her face a mask of quiet concern. "You don't have to do this, Orion," she said softly, her voice full of the kind of care that had always defined her. "There is always another way. You don't have to be the sacrifice." Drake's felt a surge of emotion rise within him. Selena had always been his anchor, the one who kept him grounded when everything around him was falling apart. He could see in her eyes the fear of what might happen if he gave in to the power, the fear of losing him, not just as a captain, but as the man he had once been. And yet, as much as he wanted to resist the pull of the power inside him, there was a deeper part of him that knew the truth. The Xerionians needed him. The universe was on the brink of chaos, and he had been given the strength to change it. But he didn't want to become the very thing he feared. A weapon, a tool to be used by others. He didn't want to lose himself. "I know what you're thinking," Viora said, her voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You think you'll lose yourself if you take this step, but you won't. The power is a part of you now. It's inside you, Orion. You can choose how to use it. You don't have to become something you're not. You can still be the man you were meant to be." Drake stood silently for a moment, his eyes flickering between Viora and Selena. Both of them had their own vision for the future, their own hopes. But in the end, it was his choice. It always had been. The power, the responsibility. It was all in his hands now. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. The universe had given him an impossible choice, but he wasn't going to let it define him. He wasn't going to be a puppet to anyone's will, not Viora's, not even his own power. He would find a way to help the Xerionians, to guide them toward a future without sacrificing who he was. With a slow, deliberate motion, Drake's raised his hand. The energy inside him responded, swirling in response to his will. It was power, yes, but it was no longer something that controlled him. He controlled it. "I will help you, Viora," he said, his voice steady. Viora's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. But then, a smile slowly spread across her face. Selena stepped forward, her expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You've done it, Orion. You've found a way to keep your humanity and save them." As the energy around him settled into a calm, steady hum, Drake's realized that this was just the beginning. The future of the Xerionians, of Earth, and of the universe was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a path forward, a path where he could be both the man he was and the leader the universe needed. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be without sacrifices, but he would find a way to do it, his way.